Grateful for the opportunity to be here this evening, and thankful again for the opportunity to open up God's Word that we might be encouraged and uplifted and let the perfect love of Jesus that he was able to demonstrate in every possible way and exemplify not only in his living but in his teaching, that we might soak that in as well. And as we think of the description of God, God is love, it says to us in 1 John, really an overarching depiction of just what really comes out in every aspect of all the complexities of God's character is always this encouraging thought that love always being the sole moving force of his character and all of what he accomplishes by his will. And so it would be encouraging for us to open up our minds and our thoughts, that we would allow God to really provoke that sense of love. And want to talk a little bit about how, especially in our homes, some qualities and characteristics of God and his love, that hopefully as we learn to exemplify that, to be open to be learning of it, that we can not only be receiving his love, but that we can seek to move in our homes in such a way that allows love an easy place to find lodging, an easy place for love to be provoked by others around us. And I always appreciated that specific statement, provoking love, provoking one another to love and good works. Almost implies the idea that we are kind of the seed planters of love, and that wherever we go, whether it's in our home, we're going to study that this morning or this evening, but if it's in our communities or extended areas of our life, it seems that if we can learn to realize and have patience, that if we plant love wherever we go, then we're prone to have love be received back to us. And want to try to have some things that might encourage us to see how can we plant love around us. What are some things that you and I can do to make sure that love is constantly having an opportunity to take root? We continue to remember, as we studied some scriptures before, and the greatness of love. So we turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, really the idea of some of the conflicts that were happening in Corinth is really, this is the concept. Paul was encouraging some of his students and his fellow brethren there in Corinth to be planters of love. He said that actually would diffuse a lot of the situation of the conflicts that were happening amongst the brothers. He said if they would learn to cultivate a type of place where love could flourish, that he was kind of encouraging them that this really would be the root way or the soul way that can move past a lot of their issues. And notice that he brings this up in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Beginning in verse 4, as he describes love, he really was encouraging those who were listening to plant aspects or to plant demonstrations of this and to be the initiators of love. That we need to be the initiators of patience. We must be the initiators of kindness. That we must be the initiators of not being jealous. And then notice that the description of love. Love does not brag, is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly, it does not seek its own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness. Notice, love is counteractive. And a lot of times, maybe our first statement of our issue would be, well, it just doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of love around me. And I love how God's answer, a lot of that is, well, let me put love in you, and you start planting that and watch that garden grow around you. Love is often what we can do to counteract towards all the negativity that is being spread against us, and we are really the proponents of love. And so he notices, says, you can be the first person to start making that happen. He says, love, how about not taking into account a wrong suffered, demonstrating mercy as opposed to taking names and accounts of every offense that has been suffered. Love, he says, rejoices with the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And I love verse 8, he says, love never fails. In other words, it will never let you down. If you are committed to planting and cultivating love in the places where you live, it will never fail to spread its wings, so to speak, and it will usually have a way of finding its way back to you. We have the testimony of one who sought love. I love it in Song of Solomon in chapter 8. There's a beautiful description of one who was seeking love and the love that was reciprocated, and how love was able to flourish when there was the attitude that was just committed. In other words, it's the statement of one who just committed themselves, saying, I'm committed to this idea and this concept of love. And Song of Solomon chapter 8, there's beginning in verse 6. It says, put me like a seal over your heart, like a seal on your arm. For love is as strong as death. Jealousy is as severe as Sheol. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters, cannot quench love. Every aspect to try to destroy your loving action, love usually triumphs. It's very difficult for anything to remove the process and the progress of love. Notice it says, if a man were to give all the riches of his house for love, it would be utterly despised. In other words, he is committed to being a loving husband. He is committing to demonstrating love towards his bride, because he's so confident that if the two can cultivate and provoke this love, it will be an unstoppable force. That it's impossible for anything really to overcome it. Love itself has a provoking nature, is really what he's saying. That's how powerful the concept of love is. And we see elements of this, and notice the concepts of how powerful certain individuals who decided they were just going to be loving. How Ruth, for example. Go over to Ruth chapter 1, and we see her devotion, her dedication to say she was committed to the concept of being devoted. And this devotion led to so many positive things that really were overwhelming over the negativity of Naomi. Despite the negativity of Naomi, despite her concept that she felt done for, that nothing really could come out of her situation, Ruth's determination to be devoted. And as again, we also see how this eventually pans out as a marriage flourishes from someone who recognizes how devoted Ruth is. And word gets out. We see in Ruth chapter 1, verse 7, it says, so she departed from the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, but we will surely return with you to your people. But Naomi said, return, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Return, my daughters. Go, for I'm too old to have a husband. If I said I have a hope, I should even have a husband tonight and also bear sons, would you therefore wait until they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is harder for me than for you, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. And they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. It says, and then she said, behold, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. And when she saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. Already she is kind of overcoming Naomi's sense of, I didn't just be by myself. He's like, no, I'm sorry, I'm not letting you do this. I'm not going to let you be by yourself. I am going, wherever you go, you better get used to me being beside you, because I'm not leaving you. her determination to be that kind of loving presence, you see the ripple effect. It just had so much power, and all it takes is just turn over to chapter 2. And in chapter 2, when we see her gleaning in the field, and we see the response of Boaz, who recognizes that word has gotten back, that she has been this devoted in her love. It says in verse 8, it says, then Boaz said to Ruth, listen carefully, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go on from this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. When you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said, why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? And Boaz replied to her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband has been fully reported to me. And how you left your father and your mother and the land of your birth and came to a people that you did not previously know. May the Lord reward your work. When we show devotion, word gets around. I love that encouraging thought. When we show a sense of loyalty, it seems that has an impact. That means something and can very easily win over how others see us. See examples of sacrifice. Sacrifice, a sacrificial love. When we are sacrificial in the way we devote our love, this usually has an impact. We turn to the Gospel of Mark in Mark chapter 15 in verse 20. Or excuse me, verse 12. Mark 15 and verse 12. We read of Jesus and his sacrifice, and it says, and Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with him whom you call the King of the Jews? They shouted back, crucify him. But Pilate said to him, why? What evil has he done? But they shouted all the more, crucify him. Wishing to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas for them, and after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. And here's an example of someone who, again, Jesus choosing to be loving, choosing to be sacrificial in his love. And I know oftentimes we feel like, well, isn't that often you're risking so much by putting yourself out there, by making yourself so vulnerable, making the first move, right? And wonder it doesn't seem like this could have much impact. Well, turn over to 2 Corinthians. And 2 Corinthians, Paul mentions how impactful was this sacrifice of Jesus. Turn to chapter 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, when Jesus went to the cross, sacrificing himself out of love, he was confident that it would do this. And Paul preaches this in 2 Corinthians 5 in verse 14. For the love of Christ controls us, having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died. In other words, we have to be the example of how much love has an ability to change the attitude of others, because we have responded to his love. Yes, love is powerful. And the sacrificial love of Jesus is what motivates others to realize maybe we should change how we're looking at it, this whole idea of life. And obedience. It provokes a sense of obedience. And obedient love can have a way in which we're submitting to the higher principles of God and showing honor, preference to others, and we're seeking to show preference the way that Paul and others encourage us to put others above ourselves, in that sense of love, a selfless love. This has impact. Turn over to John chapter 14. In John chapter 14. And notice, as we back up to verse 8. In verse 8, Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Jesus said to him, have I been so long with you, and that you have not come to know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak of my own initiative, but the Father abiding in me does his works. Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. Otherwise, believe because of the works themselves. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes in me, the works that I do, he will do also. And greater works than these he will do, because I go to the Father. Whatever you ask in my name, that will I do, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask me anything in my name, I will do it. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. Jesus was so confident that his sacrificial love, his devoted love, even Jesus' obedient love would cause us all to be persuaded, that we would submit, that we would willingly alter how we behave. That's the power of love. That's the power of dedicating himself in these loving ways. And so if we can see the impact that his love has on us, hopefully we can see that impact we can have just by provoking love. And that's what the Hebrew writer is speaking about. Let us be willing to put ourselves out on the limb, to be the initiators, whether it's there or not, but confident that it will have a way of impacting and having those outer circles where it brings results. So you may say, well, what can I do to provoke love in the home? Well, what is this all about? What is it that I can do that assures or gives me confidence that it can flourish the way we're speaking of? Well, one way is by first being lovable. We need to recognize that sometimes we focus so much of our attention on what we need to do and what others need to do, and what sometimes we need to do. We need to realize maybe it's us being more submissive, more gentle way in the way that we interact with others, that we are making it easier for others to love us. God always encourages us to humble ourselves. God is opposed to the proud, but he draws near to those who are humble. And I think in so many ways, this is God teaching us that let us always be the first person to recognize maybe there's things that I need to do that makes it easier for me to be received better. Turn to Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4. I think Paul was certainly mentioning that if I can change the way that I view my sense of priority, if I can shift a little bit my sense of looking out more for the needs of those around me. In Philippians chapter 4, there in verse 8, he says, finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence, and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. The things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. In other words, I need to commit myself to humbling myself and at times realizing that I need to maybe go to God's love and realize maybe I'm not as loved. Maybe I'm not being that person who's exalting love the way that God does, and I need to be better at that. And I need to be humble enough to say, well, maybe I just need to learn to just be so focused and meditating on the loving qualities of God. All these things that are good and wholesome and pure. They have a way of dominating even our own attitudes, and they can soften those things and maybe realize, well, maybe my acceptance of God's love makes me easier maybe to be someone that others want to love as well. Turn to Ephesians chapter 5. In Ephesians chapter 5, as we read in husbands and wives, the relationship there in verse 25, it says, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her. That right there is saying, husbands, be someone who it's easier for your wife to want to love you. That devotion to the sacrificial nature of my demeanor. When I'm given more to wanting God to mold that in me. He's saying that what's going to make it so that's provoking that love. It's making the other who looks at me almost be drawn in a sense that now in a more primed condition where they seek to honor us and demonstrate that love as well. Let's go to Luke chapter 15 and verse 11. Luke chapter 15. In verse 11. It says, and he said, a man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods of the swine were eating, so no one was giving anything to him. But when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying here with hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So he got up and came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him, and then embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to his father, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life, and again he has lost, has been found. And they began to celebrate. Notice the attitude change in this man's attitude, and all of a sudden he's feeling embraced when he didn't feel he wanted to be there at all. In other words, his initial attitude was, I don't want to be here. No fun being here. It's almost as if he's looking at it must be everybody else, and he realized, no, maybe it's me. Maybe I need to humble myself. That attitude change changed the dynamic of this family relationship. His willingness to look inward, his willingness to say maybe some things that I need to start lowering myself and realizing how blessed I truly am, and maybe I need to demonstrate, maybe I need to express that. And his expression of that brought this celebration of this reunion with his father and with the other members of the household. Eventually, yes, we see the trouble with his older brother, but that's the ripple effect. It has this, and we see the father trying to even bring the other son into all this. So in other words, be lovable. Let's humble ourselves and say, can we humble ourselves? Can we let God teach us that maybe a more humble, submissive attitude can maybe be what provokes it? A couple other things. How about just being thoughtful? Thoughtfulness can provoke love amongst us. As we mentioned there in Hebrews chapter 10, the idea is that with good deeds usually speak of that sense of being open and being sensitive to listening to what others are going through. Sometimes I think maybe the reason, maybe if we can humble ourselves, maybe the reason why love does not seem to be flourishing so much in this primary home and amongst those closest to me, and we maybe have that sense of indicting and accusing. People don't seem to pay attention to me. People don't seem to notice me. People don't seem to think about me. And again, God has an amazing way. When we start flipping that, and we start humbling ourselves, and we start saying, well, I'm just going to be the initiator. But maybe the truth is, we just haven't been paying enough attention to express it to others. And all it will take is just turning that attitude around. There in Acts chapter 11. Go to Acts chapter 11. We see attitudes can easily influence others simply by changing how we think. Acts chapter 11 verse 1 says, now the apostles and the brethren who were throughout Judea heard that the Gentiles also had received the word of God. And when Peter came up to Jerusalem, those who were circumcised took issue with him, saying, "You went to uncircumcised men and ate with them." But Peter began speaking and proceeded to explain to them in orderly sequence, saying, "I was in the city of Joppa praying, and in a trance I saw a vision, an object coming down like a great sheet, lowered by four corners from the sky, and it came right down to me. And when I had fixed my gaze on it and was observing, and I saw the four-footed animals of the earth and the wild beasts and the crawling creatures and the birds of the air, I also heard a voice saying to me, 'Get up, Peter, kill and eat.' But I said, 'By no means, Lord, for nothing unholy or unclean has ever entered my mouth.' But a voice from heaven answered a second time, 'What God has cleansed, no longer consider unholy.' This happened 3 times, and everything was drawn back up into the sky. And behold, at that moment 3 men appeared in the house in which we were staying, having been sent to me from Caesarea. The Spirit told me to go with them, and without misgivings, these 6 brethren also went with me, and we entered the man's house." I love how God shows Peter sometimes just changing how we look at circumstances is actually the best thing that we need to change for Peter. It opened up a whole nother world for Gentiles to receive the love of God. That all of a sudden Peter realized that I've been thinking about this wrong. And that's a good lesson. That sometimes maybe the first step is just maybe I need to be a little bit more proactive how I think about those around me. And when I start doing that, then another thing starts happening. I start actually being the one who wants to love even those who are difficult to love. It's almost it grows, and all of a sudden, instead of waiting for me to be the recipient, instead of waiting for it to come around, I start to being the one who wants to be the initiator of it. Just because I'm beginning to be filled more with these loving concepts, and I'm seeing this in a more light, I'm willing to be more. Turn to Matthew chapter 5 and verse 43. Matthew 5 and verse 43 says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Therefore you are to be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect." The more I've thought about this idea of loving your enemies, loving those who are difficult to love, because this comes at the end of so much of what he's been instilling about what a loving attitude looks like, and what a loving mindset looks like. And what I've begun to realize, that love has a way of it heals first ourselves. The more we let God fill us with his teaching of love, we start to break down these barriers. All these things that we didn't maybe realize, maybe we're resistant to it. And we start breaking down those barriers. All of a sudden, we become so eager to express the love that we know has affected us. The love that God is provoking us to be more submissive, to be more honoring, to be more peaceable. That I almost believe that how do we get to the point where we want to love our neighbors, even the difficult ones? I believe it's saying you're going to be so addicted to the concept of love, you just want to love everything. You want to love, you love the idea of it because it's healing you, it's helping you. Isn't that the idea that Jesus talked about? He said, "I want to heal the inside first, that the outside may appear to be clean." And I believe what he's showing us is that if we can first humble ourselves to the point that maybe I just don't think about God's love enough. I don't think about how much his intention to impact me, and when we let it have that, we just kind of go on a mission. It's as if to love at all times. You do that in your home and watch it spread. You be determined. It's just so much more peaceable. I feel so much better about myself. I feel so much better about the people around me. I feel so much more better about my relationship with God. That I'm being more of an outward example of how he just never stops loving me, never stops trying to reach me. That all of a sudden it seems like it really starts to become almost this unstoppable force. And it really seems like so much of what God is telling us is very much that way, that it's something that, eternity I think is going to be very much like that. When we really allow the concepts of God to be in us, when we allow him to direct us, we realize that from within how much better, how much more confident, how much closer we feel to God. That we can't stop in whatever situation we're in to try to be someone who expresses it. Turn over to 1 John. 1 John speaks so much about this. In 1 John chapter 4, he speaks about, again, this abiding concept of God's love. 1 John chapter 4, beginning in verse 7, says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God." That's the first step. When we realize how much of God's love that we're able to receive, that he's willing to give, that he's willing to break down the barriers that we even have, and he softens us, and he molds us with it. And we realize that all this love that comes from him. And then what happens is, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. We realize that it only makes us even feel closer and more confident in our relationship with God. Because that's what it does to us. That's what it will do to you. But if I can humble myself and say, I just need to meditate more on this. Let these concepts really saturate and infiltrate all the parts of my life that I need him to communicate this to me. That's what he's telling us is going to happen. We're going to realize that this could only come from God because of the powerful way that it does. It changes people. It changes circumstances. It changes times when we may feel it. I don't know how this relationship could get any better. I don't know how we can reconcile past certain things. Love is the antidote to that. Every time. And so he says, you determine to let this love pour down from God and fill you and teach you. He says, everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. And verse 8, and the one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. Also indicating if we don't know God, we're not going to know and we're not going to see transformation happen. In other words, that's what he's saying. He's saying, if you feel like there are things that could do better in your home, if you feel like there are things that could bring people closer together in your home, if you feel like there's moments of distance in your home, and you feel like I'm doing everything I can, perhaps humbling ourselves and letting God teach us a little bit more about this concept of love can break down further barriers. And as we say, he said, if I don't do it, if I don't humble myself, I'll never see it. I'll never be able to be a part of this. And so notice he says, so if we can trust this, verse 9, he says, by this the love of God was manifested in us, that God sent his only begotten Son into the world so that we might live through him. And this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for us. It says the greatest explosion of the evidence of love was someone who just said, I'm just going to choose to love you. I've just decided that no human being will go through this earth without recognizing the fact that somebody loved them when they shouldn't have been loved. So he was determined that was going to be the message. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. He wants to make sure everybody's going to hear that. Everybody needs to know that. God, the originator of the greatest garden physical of mankind, he knows something about planting things. He created the garden. He wanted man to be there to flourish it, to tend to it. Let God's love be the seeds that start planting a beautiful garden of love that will grow in the most difficult of circumstances. Is really what John is encouraging us, that he's seen proof of it. He's encouraging us to buy into this, to obey this. Just plant it. And in the hardest of circumstances, watch how powerful it really is. So if we can be the recipients of it, if we can be the believers in it, if we can be the responders of it, then we in turn become the planters of it. And he said, you know what's going to happen? You're going to watch God at work. Because it impacts and it does so much. And so in verse 10 he says, and this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love is perfected in us. By this we know that we abide in him, and he in us, because he has given us of his Spirit. We have seen and testify that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. And by Savior, he means the one who redeems and changes the world. He loved because he knew how powerful that love has impact. And it's one of the greatest things we can do as children of God, as students and followers of God's love. See, I'm determined, just as God was, to just be this loving person. To be determined that I'm going to demonstrate through me my connection of God's love through me, and I'm just going to share that and be that and humble myself and learn more from him and let him fill me with more of it. And he says, you know what its intention is to do? It's to save so many other people, not just you. It saves others. And so he brings us now to this very specific act. Let's follow it to its conclusion. We'll end on this note. But notice in verse 15. He says, whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him, and he in God. We have come to know and have believed the love which God has for us. God is love. And the one who abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. And by this love is perfected with us, so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment, because as he is, so also are we. Notice, in this world, God's ultimate mechanism to change the world is through you and I. And so if God is so confident that you and I, if we just buy into this, submit to this, let his love take root in us, actually abide in us, he's going to use us as the agents of love, that it's going to have that ripple effect, and it's going to have such impact, it has to have impact. That's why he tells us to believe, endure all things. Endure it. Why? Because it's worth it, because the longer you endure it, the greater time you have for that your love to impact. And so if it has this widespread intention of influence, how much more if I do it just where I live? In my little place of the world. In the immediate relationships in my world. It's amazing how many times we fail to see that. We're waiting for it to be given to us. We're waiting for it to be displayed to us. Why? If we are the ones who know love on the greatest level because of how God shows it to us, let us be more than willing and glad to show it, to demonstrate it, to put it in a place where others can see it. And it impacts and will affect the nature of our future relationships with others. But that's what he's telling us. So if you could only understand the impact of you being the willing initiative. That's what he says. The whole point of chapter 4 is God initiated. He did not wait. He did it first. And all of this, the church, the hope, the gospel, our own families, we have benefited by God planting and saying, I'm just going to let that love be there and initiate. So he says, let us follow suit. So as he says in verse 17, again, he says, by this love is perfected with us, so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment, because as he is, so also are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. We love, notice, because he first loved us, and we recognize that made a difference. His initiation, his decision that he would do it whether we were worthy of it or not. What a major potential impact we have just by saying, I'll plant it. I'll be the one who initiates. Verse 20, if someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother, whom he has seen, cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him, and the one who loves God should love his brother also. It's one of the greatest things that happens when we follow this. We just submit. Just start with God. Just start as you as a vessel, saying, if I'm to have any impact on the level God did, I just need to let God teach me, be filled with it, be humble, and let him reveal to us those places, like the brother and the prodigal son. He just needed to learn. He just needed to run. He just needed to change his attitude, and it changed for the better. And maybe as I begin to humble myself, and as we do this, it makes me be a better initiator of love towards those around me. And sometimes that's all it takes, is that starting point. And so as we think about these things, as we think about the condition of our relationships, the condition of our homes, the conditions of relationships even outside of the home, what a gift. In other words, we never have to settle and say, well, I guess this is how it is. This is how it's always going to be. You say, no, God's about change. God is about making progress. God is about taking us from one place of darkness and making it better in the light. And isn't it amazing? He's so confident that if he can get through to us, then that change can happen in us and we benefit from it. He says, and that's John's message, if we can just let light in us, how much more we are poised for great impact by initiating it around the people that we know in our world, in our communities, and especially in the relationship we have in our homes that we enjoy, that God has blessed us with. But whatever the case is, we bring some of these thoughts to a close. Let us appreciate how much God is confident that Jesus, when he initiated that love, that it would bring back results, and it has. That's where we need to go. We need to go to Jesus on the cross when we're struggling with that. And picture Jesus there as he was alone. For the most part, he was abandoned by many of his closest disciples. He cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Feeling even a sense of loneliness. But still, he was determined. He was going to demonstrate the greatest love. And he was going to be vulnerable, and he was going to be hurt through it. But he did it because he was so confident that it has the power to change everything around him. And it did. Immediately there was a soldier who had to come to terms with it. We hope that there's someone with us here this evening that perhaps just by thinking about that selfless giving, sacrificial way that Jesus loved will have an impact on you, and it's intended to have an impact. That's why he wants you and I to think about these things. Because they do, they have a way of breaking down our barriers, breaking down our pride to the point where we have to submit and we have to accept it and we want it in our life. And so we hope that that's something that can happen with someone who's with us in us this evening, that you would allow these barriers to break down to such a point that you want to receive that love, that you want to confess that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. You would be persuaded to change from your sins, to turn away from those things, those harmful things that sin brings in our life. We would die to those things and be buried in water, to be done with those things, to die, to rise up, to walk in newness of life. That baptism, we would submit to that and be cleansed and forgiven and washed by the blood of Jesus. And then be determined to let Jesus teach you and teach us how we can do that. How can we be a presence of love? And he tells us if we learn to do that, it is bound to impact. And it provokes. It just has a way of bending the will and making change and great progress. And so we're encouraged by that and pray that as we come to the end of this lesson and this service, that if there's someone here that needs to be baptized, that we can help you, that you'll be willing to let God help you, heal you, forgive you through your submission, obedience to the gospel. If any of us has already done that and we need help, we need comfort, we need prayers of whatever kind, if we're struggling, let us love you. Let us rally around you and help you, encourage you, whatever the case is, but we're here to help one another, but let God's love be present. And if anyone needs to submit to that love, we're here to help you do it while we stand and sing the psalm of encouragement. Won't you come and we'll help you while we stand and sing the song together.